Longtime listeners know I'm fascinated by working remotely and all the things that are possible. And while I don't normally talk about product, I found one that intrigued me, so I wanted to talk to the CEO and creator on this one. Adam Riggs of Frameable talks to me about using virtual spaces on this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I always ask in these is to give somebody the listeners' perspective on how you got here. So tell me a little bit about kind of your journey, your career path that led you to do what you're doing now.
Well, I started working in e-commerce back in 2005 at a company called Shutterstock. Shutterstock is a stock photography, started off as a stock photography company and branched out into video and vectors and all kinds of other file types. Then from 2012 to 16, I was working in government, including at the Treasury Department and the State Department. And since I left government, I've been working on a variety of collaboration, remote collaboration tools that are meant to help people who are working together from afar, be more effective, be more efficient, and also have more fun doing it.
I think the obvious first question then is you've been thinking a lot about this, and I know you've got a product in the space, that is focused here, the Frameable product.
Yep.
What do you think people are getting wrong about working in a distributed manner that you wanted to address?
The first thing I think is that the visual vector of information that people take in with their eyes is so critically important for how they process and how they react and how they can communicate and collaborate. And a lot of the software that's out there does not pay enough attention to design. To graphic design or to interaction design. There was a time, we could debate when it was, there was an era when putting video boxes on a computer with real-time video was a magical thing, was an amazing accomplishment. But that era is over now, and we really need to move beyond the idea that just a video box is enough. It doesn't conjure enough of what working together conjures. It doesn't deliver enough of the opportunities that working together can deliver. And if we're going to move out of this phase, we're going to need a lot more talented software engineers and designers to focus on, upping their game basically when it comes to design.
Now, I spent some time looking at the Frameable product in preparation to talk to you. And it's intriguing because you're essentially creating virtual offices, laid out in the way people might work. It felt a little bit like presence, the old idea of being able to see, but a lot more. Give me a little bit of kind of the mental model of the way the product works.
Sure. So I agree with you. It does connect to this idea of presence. And, one of the things that people are used to now with Microsoft Teams, with Slack, with AOL Instant Messenger, going all the way back to all of the IM clients that, existed in the prior generation, is that, a green dot or a red dot, or a faded name that shows that you're not at your desk is really not very much information. I mean, these days, because people have a lot of these clients on their phone, their dot may be green. They might be driving, their dot may be green. They might be at the store or they might be at their desk. There's such a wide range of what that can mean that I think that the presence vector of information that maybe used to be more reliable is no longer really reliable. So one of the things that we thought a lot about with our Spaces product is how can we bring back this peripheral vision that the context that comes from the peripheral vision that you naturally and effortlessly take in when you're in a physical space. I mean, if you have windows, you're taking in what's happening on the outside. If you're walking down the street, you're taking in what's happening, in the yards and at the storefronts of the things that you're passing. And when you're in an office, there's a tremendous amount of information about your colleagues, who's in, who's not, who they're working with, how long have they been working there, did they just head to the cafe? All of this peripheral vision really contributes not only to your sense of well-being as a human, it also contributes to your assessment of the opportunities to collaborate briefly or at length with the people around you. And video meeting software just doesn't give any of that. So our starting point was, how can we bring that back into the picture?
So walk me through a little bit of the way you envision someone in the virtual space you've created here working. Like, how does it sort of I would think it would slightly adjust their workflow a little bit.
Okay, so first of all, we have clients who use our software in a pretty wide variety of ways. So we have people who use it all day, every day. They treat it like a virtual space, like a virtual, persistent virtual space. They come in the morning, they begin their day there. They do all of their work in that space. Sometimes they're with other people. Sometimes they're alone. Sometimes their doors are open. Sometimes they're not. But the point is, they're there all day long. We have other people who use it just for certain meetings, where they just want people to come back to a beautiful, well-designed virtual space so that they can have their weekly meeting or their afternoon meeting or their quarterly meeting. They want it to look a certain way. They want it to be designed a certain way. They want it to be easily accessible. So all of these things are variables, really, and they can decide how it's going to play out for the people who are coming. So if it's an everyday space, let's start with the everyday case first. So you would come in, you would maybe have your cup of coffee in the morning. You'd walk into the office a few minutes before your first meeting, just like in a physical space. You would see people, again, peripherally. You would see people who else was there already, who was chit-chatting. You might go in, say hi. You might try to do a little work before your first morning meeting, find somebody and ask if you could pick up on something that you started the day before. And then over the course of the day, you'll have the same exact mix of scheduled meetings that were scheduled long ago and scheduled meetings that were scheduled recently. But in addition to that, you'll have the opportunity to bump into people and to grab people, ask them to help you with something that you're wrestling with. And also you'll be able to signal to other people when it is you're open to being helpful to them.
So this is where I think it's interesting. You're really trying to recreate some of those serendipitous moments in an office, right? But I have to acknowledge that's still a little different virtually. Like, what's the magic there that's creating those serendipitous moments virtually?
Yeah. Well, we don't think it comes from special hardware, $1,500 headsets and super high bandwidth required setups that only a small percentage of people can afford. So that goes back to the design challenge. We challenged ourselves to design an experience that used the existing hardware. So we don't think it comes from hardware. We do think it comes from thinking first, starting with physical office space, which is generally purposefully designed to be beautiful, to be inspiring, and to help people do efficient work together, that they enjoy. And then thinking, okay, what are the virtual corollaries of that space? Well, like you said, we need to make it possible for people to have unscheduled collaborations. We need to make it possible to make announcements that everyone can hear. We need to make it possible to, to bump into people. We need to make it possible to have all hands meetings where someone's on a stage and most of the rest of the audience is listening. We need to be able to create private spaces. I mean, all of the things that everybody already knows about physical space and what makes it work as a high functioning office, we needed to work in. But then there's another layer of functionality which goes beyond what's possible in the physical space, which is, for example, if I was in a physical office, I could see who was there. And maybe if they were in a room with a big whiteboard and I could make out something that was on the whiteboard, I could know what they were working on. Again, if I didn't, check calendars and things like that. But I wouldn't be able to just look at people and know by default what they're working on. I mean, people don't write what they're working on a sticky note, put it behind their desk, and then people who walk around can just absorb that. So one of the nice opportunities of the virtual world is that it's so easy to share that information in a way that's actually more efficient than the physical corollary. So we make it easy in the software for those kinds of personal status updates, or maybe the room that people are in. There's a project name on the room temporarily, so people know, those 3 people are in that room, and that's the Project X room. So they must be working on Project X. So little things like that take advantage of the virtual medium. They go beyond what's available physically without it being too awkward. And for us and for the users, that's really what makes the difference.
So you've been giving a lot of thought to the subtle differences of the physical world versus the remote. And I've been quipping a lot on my show and talking about this drive, the old school manager that's trying to drive everyone back into the office. And I laugh now because every time I hear some CEOs or managers stand up and say, we all need to be back in the office, my immediate thought is, you are not good at managing people. Mm-hmm. The reason you want to do that is because there's a certain default. That said, there is a skill to creating both culture and management in virtual spaces. As you've been, going on this product journey, what are you finding about that difference that's necessary to be effective with a product like this?
The peripheral blindness that people have from home is the place to start. So normally, when you're using video meeting software, the kind that everyone's used to, if you want to find out anything about what that person is doing or who they're spending their time with, in most companies, if calendars are open, you can go and check their calendar. So I think during the pandemic, managers, learned that since they don't have this peripheral vision into how people are spending their time and who they're spending it with in any other way, that they maybe need to load people's calendars. And I think for some companies, maybe if the calendars weren't open before the pandemic, maybe people realized that they needed to be opened more during the pandemic, or maybe they were open before, but they weren't really checked in the same way, because a manager walking around a physical office, like I said, they are collecting a lot of information, which is pretty useful. If you expect as a manager 2 particular employees to work on a certain thing today, and it's a hard thing, it's a big thing, so it's going to take a few hours. If you're at the office, you at least would see those people together. Whereas if they're at home and they're working bilaterally, they're working in a way where you're unaware that they're doing it because it's just a video feed and a video feed between them, then you have to do extra work to find out, well, was there anything on the calendar? Well, did it actually happen? Well, was it fruitful? And you need to ask a lot of questions. And, sometimes that's more work than people want to do. Or sometimes you could do all that work and still not really get, the information that you need. So I think that the peripheral vision that's available in a physical office is one of the most important things that helps managers actually do their job. And I think that what we've seen in the last couple of years is that it's still difficult to take a calendar and add up calendars and look and assess the way people are spending their time through calendars and get to the same place as what you're able to easily absorb when you're walking around. But there's also another reading of the demand/preference for people to come back to the office. And that is that, experienced managers, they may have more experience understanding the value of the serendipitous interactions and the last minute unscheduled interactions between colleagues. And what they may be saying when they say, please come back to the office, is although the convenience is hard to beat and few people enjoy their commute, and few people would prefer to trade their commute for their workout or extra time with their kids, I think that what the management layer might be saying is it's hard for us to explain in a convincing way how valuable that those interactions are, those unscheduled or last minute scheduled interactions. But please don't hold that against us. We know that over time, they make the difference with mentorship. They make the difference with, learning things that are in adjacent areas of expertise from the one that you're focused on. And the problem with remote work that's through a calendar is that it's extremely deliberate. Everything has to be deliberate. You schedule with a certain person in a certain slot, with another person in another slot, with another person in another slot. And it's just much more deliberate than it is natural for an extended period of time. And I think that part of what they're saying when they say come back to the office is we have to figure out how to get that back into our lives. And if we can't do it with remote tools, because the people who build remote tools haven't figured out how to do that yet, then we're going to, by default, go back to the way we're familiar with. Now, I don't think that we're going back to 2019 when it comes to how most people work. So they can say come back to the office, but that's not going to make it so. I think what they're really doing is making a rational choice among a very incomplete set of alternatives when it comes to the video tools that are there.
Right, and you're obviously betting on supplying a tool in that space.
Yes,
So there were two obvious use cases when I was looking at it. The obvious is a company of size, right? You have a physical building or 100 people or larger, obvious, and you also have a conference tool. So like I could see it from the event perspective.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about the use case when it gets a lot smaller.
Sure.
I'm a big advocate for SMB. We'll observe that the vast majority of companies in in the United States are smaller ones.
Yep.
Talk to me about the use case of how it looks in, say, like a 10 or a 15-person company.
Sure. So, small companies like that, obviously they will rely more heavily on contractors and people who are not necessarily full-time employees. They probably have a healthy mix of full-time employees, part-time employees, critical contractors, and then, sort of secondary contractors. So just like with the video software that people are used to, you can have a Zoom or a Teams meeting with anyone. It doesn't discriminate, so to speak, who you're talking to. But maybe at the beginning, there's an extra screen or something. Like if you and I are at the same organization, maybe we get in without a security, warning or some kind of notice at the front, depending on how people have configured the software. In our space, again, in our product, which is called Spaces, again, just going back to the corollary with the physical world, think of it like a building. If you're a small company, you can just have one floor to your building, or you can just think of it as a suite, and you can give the key to the suite or the one-story building to anybody you want. They can be an employee, they can be a contractor, whoever it is can get in exactly the same way. If you are a larger organization and you want more differentiated permissions, then you can do that. You can have people who are able to come in with no friction at all. You can have another group of people who maybe will wait in the waiting room, and then they'll have to be let in. But all of these are possible. It's a full spectrum, just like in a physical space that has a good security system at the front and a receptionist at the front. That's basically how it works, which means it can work however you'd like.
For me, the interesting bit is what you've just explained, that it can be configured in a bunch of ways. And anybody that's listening to my show knows I always say, well, there's the services opportunity, right? Is helping somebody implement that. Talk to me a little bit about the way that you guys have thought about that process.
To be totally honest, we have some work to do in that category, I think. Okay. We recognize that most companies don't buy software directly. They buy it through a provider, an integrator or a services provider like what you've described. I think for us so far, what we, our starting point on this front is that, you have a landlord, right? But the landlord probably, after the lease is all in place and everything is, and you've done the initial walkthrough and everything's working properly, even the landlord cannot just walk into your leased space. So I think that for companies that are relying on someone else in a full service way, like, no, we actually, when we think of landlord, we think of landlord plus the receptionist, maybe, if that's the metaphor, then I think, we have an easy way to accommodate them, because, the admins of the space, they can be people who work at your company directly, or they can be anyone you give that permission to. So if I'm a provider of this type of space, if I'm a WeWork model for this type of space, then I'm in charge of the building and all the utilities, and I'm also in charge of letting people in the front door. And that is exactly how it could work now. But if the services provider is meant to provide additional services, like if the tenant were to say, I'd like reports on, how often my employees are here, or I'd like to know who's collaborating with other people, then in the Zoom and Teams world, there's a thick book of stats that they'll deliver to the admins of the tool. Most people don't look at those. And for us, what we think about that is that those stats are useful, but there's something wrong with the way they're being presented and the way they're no one's interested in consuming them. We think that that's a problem with the way they're being presented, and that people haven't really thought about how useful they are. So if you're a service provider that's offering that, then we have some ways that we can help you provide that to your client if that's something you're interested in providing. So I think it starts with the introduction and the sale, and it could stop with the setup, or it could go all the way through to the sort of full service landlord experience that's at the other end of the spectrum.
I think you're right. I think it can also include the, all of those discussions we had about training to be effective, where it's about like helping small, mid-sized companies that are using the technologies, teaching their managers how to, to present online, how to configure the spaces. I think there's a lot. So
I just want to say we do spend a lot of time thinking about how can we help people be effective. I think our presumption is that the people who are interested in that material are the managers of the companies, not the integrators necessarily. But I mean, that could just reflect what we have to learn about the broad services that integrators might provide.
Or it could be just a state of play on the market right now.
Yeah.
The companies that are forward thinking on that, it's coming internally versus being pushed from a technology provider. I think this is early space. I will freely admit to you and all my listeners, this is why I'm curious about it. I think there's opportunity here, and it's confusing.
Yeah.
I like confusing problems because solving them is generally lucrative.
Yep.
And there's not one way to do it, too. It's got to be customized to a particular customer, and why I'm intrigued. Agreed. So I think you've given a bunch to think about. If people are interested in learning more, what's the best way to do so? For
the office space product that we've been talking about, it's called Spaces. And so just frameable.com. /spaces, and there's a lot of information there and a lot of great graphics that sort of help you imagine what it could be for you.
Awesome. Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for your time and attention. Time is a finite resource, and I really value you giving me some of yours. If you like this video, you can let me know with a like of the video, and even more valuable, hitting the subscription button. My content is all free, and I use metrics like subscriptions to pay the bills, so it has real value. The content here is produced under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you're interested in more content like this, you can get access to content early via our Patreon at patreon.com/MSPradio. It's our give what you want model, where you set the value of what you think the content is worth. If you like this podcast, you can catch it daily as the 5-minute news and commentary show, The Business of Tech, available on all your favorite podcatchers with links at businessof.tech. Just hit that big blue button to subscribe. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to listen, and I really value the interaction. If
If you want to say something in the comments, I do respond and watch all that, and I look forward to talking to you next time.